Well, it's like again what you say with part of the false dichotomy. Like, well, either Gaddafi's good or he's bad. You have to choose a side. Where you can't. There's no room for critical thinking. It seems where it says, well, Gaddafi's bad, but maybe we shouldn't bomb him. Maybe we shouldn't send him bombs of love, or maybe we shouldn't get involved because of other reasons. It's only like our way. It's like 100% good, 100% evil. It's almost religious in a way. And I want to ask you, what do you think this means for American and Chinese relations? Not even just American, like relations with the West in general, because this seems to be an attack on Chinese interests in Libya.
It certainly does seem to be setting up that way, and we see that again. I think throughout the region, and it's something that I think is starting off rather slowly and quietly at first, and we have larger and larger indications that this is what's playing out. Of course, it's not being really discussed in the media that we're being shown, but if you look at the CFR and other publications that they put out and globalist think tanks like that, you see that this is more and more what people are talking about and worrying about. And obviously, China has been the main target of American strategic military planning since the fall of the Soviet Union. It's been envisioning what would happen if China took Taiwan and the South China Seas and all that. So that's the end game that they've been planning for all these years. And this whole Al Qaeda threat, the war on terror narrative, came up in 2001, obviously, to try to. I guess really, I mean, ultimately that provides a convenient excuse for putting in the permanent bases in Iraq and moving eventually into Iran and Syria and Libya and all these other places which are of strategic interest, not only to, of course, Iran, which is a key player in the region, but ultimately towards encircling China and Russia with NATO. And we're getting closer and closer to that type of an endgame. And we can see the beginnings of this. We can see it definitely starting to play out. And it's just a question of calling it out and calling it for what it is, and recognizing that we are being engineered into this type of third World War, quiet war type scenario, where very soon things could heat up at a moment's notice. And we see that more and more. And again, it's another false dichotomy where we are being, the people who can at least see the geopolitical wrangling that are taking place might be mistaken for thinking that China is truly an enemy to American interests, or an enemy that has developed spontaneously. But if you look at the history of the past few decades and how China has been deliberately positioned as the industrial engine of the world and sort of the economic powerhouse now that's shaping up, again, that seems to be a position that's been deliberately crafted for China. So once again, we see the building up of the enemy, and again, I think it's going to be used as an excuse and justification for the increasing military expansion of the Western powers, including, of course, the American government.
Well, hasn't the United States given large amount of aid and help to China? Also, when you had David Rockefeller going over there in the 70s, calling the social experiment under Chairman Mao one of the most important in human history, even though it ended up with between 40 and 60 million deaths, depending on who you ask.
Right. Well, I think the most conservative figures are 60 million, and I think the Chinese government itself even claims 80 million, so I guess they're proud of that fact. Yeah, definitely tens of millions dead through the great social experiment that Rockefeller was praising in his famous obituary to Mao in the New York Times. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's just a pattern of key strategic players like Rockefeller and Kissinger who were forging the relations between America and China, which we've seen developed over the past decades. And some interesting things that I only learned recently. Timothy Geithner apparently is fluent in Mandarin and can converse with. He spent some time in China, I believe, at a school there. I'm not sure of the details, but again, these key players are more and more focused on China as the region that will obviously determine the economic future of the United States in the future if things are to develop as they seem to be. And another key step in that whole process was the creation of the GATT and then the World Trade Organization, these framework of agreements that have ultimately ended up basically offshoring and outsourcing more and more of the industrial base of the Western countries to places like China and India. And that, again, was a deliberate process that was set up. And you had even members of the inside sort of global elite, like James Goldsmith back in the 1990s, warning, saying, this is going to destroy our economies. This is not the way to conduct free trade or world relations. I mean, if you are an international company that wants to open up a branch in China, that's great, but you should play by China's rules, and you are then a Chinese company in China. But don't try to be this international corporation. It's going to completely bankrupt the system. And everything that's come true since he made those warnings back in the 1990s has proven him right, and proven the advocates of free trade, as the globalization movement has deemed it, they've been completely and utterly wrong every step of the way, saying this was going to be this great force for bringing so much wealth and happiness to humanity. And all we have to show for it now is just menial service jobs, an economy that's absolutely in tatters, and that relies on cheap imported goods from China. So it's an untenable system, and again, there will be the people who bring up the incompetence theory that all of this came about because the people just don't know what they're doing. But that's an absolute lie, and it's proven by people like James Goldsmith, who came out and said exactly what was going to happen. And they were, of course, scoffed at and dismissed during the debates back in the 90s. But they turned out to be correct. So once again, this is a system that has been consciously manipulated and engineered to bring us to the point that we're at now.
Well, I have to agree with you. I want to ask you, where do you see this going? This situation in Libya going, because right now we have a bit of a weakening of resolve in the NATO alliance. Last I heard, Norway was going to withdraw its air support.
Actually, I hadn't even heard that story, but yeah, there certainly is a weakening of resolve as this continues to drag on month after month after month, after having originally been promised this would just be, originally, it was just supposed to be a no-fly zone, but that immediately turned into a full-scale bombardment of Libya. So again, it's just lie after lie after lie. But where it's going, again, we see the stories now. I think France was claiming that the Libyan government's representatives were telling them that Gaddafi was ready to capitulate and to try to strike a deal, and that he'll be gone by September, and all of this. And again, is this just more of this kind of he's gone to Venezuela kind of bunk that's being spread to try to demoralize the Libyans who regardless of what you think about the conflict and what's really happening, there is absolutely demonstrably millions of people who are still supportive of Gaddafi's government there, and we saw that with the incredible, massive rally of support for Gaddafi in Tripoli just a couple of weeks ago that went absolutely, completely ignored by the corporate establishment media, whereas demonstrations in opposition to Gaddafi get breathless coverage in all of this different media sources. So there's undoubtedly an attempt to demoralize the Libyans themselves, and to try to, reinvigorate the NATO resolve to continue with this operation. And we've seen reports, unconfirmed reports at this point, but reports of that military forces are preparing for intervention, actually ground invasion of Libya as early as October. We'll see. We'll have to see what comes of that, but certainly it does seem at this point that they're definitely not going to give up and go home. This is obviously something that's going to have to play out, and that's something that even the Brookings Institute put out a report in February when this Libyan thing started, saying that this was a test of the resolve of the international community, and that Libya was an important key strategic part of the new international order. So again, they're couching this in all these, responsibility to protect and other types of euphemisms, but basically this is a demonstration of a new aspect of international jurisprudence, whereby countries can go in and invade other sovereign nations because they claim that this country is attacking its citizens, or whatever excuse they have, and whatever ridiculous stories they invent about giving troops Viagra in order to help facilitate the rape of his own people. Just ridiculous stories that turn out to be absolutely provably false. But again,
the whole raping, the whole Viagra rape, it just harkens back to the 1990s with the incubator babies in Iraq.
Exactly right, which again was proven to be a complete fabrication that was being disseminated by the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the UN, I believe, was the connection. You'll have to correct me on that if I'm wrong, but it was something like that. And of course, the fact that this was the daughter of the ambassador was not actually touted at the fact. This was just a Kuwaiti who was talking about these incubator atrocities, and of course gaining incredible amounts of coverage. And that was being promoted through a PR firm in Washington. So again, that was a story that was deliberately crafted, and it was a deliberate lie, like the WMDs in Iraq, and like so many other lies that have been used as justifications for wars. And again, we have this Viagra story that's being touted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Moreno Ocampo, who's made a name for himself, and even the humanitarian groups and others that want to fight for this idea of responsibility to protect, even they want this guy out of there. There's been a furor about him for years now, as he went after the al-Bashir government in Sudan over the Darfur thing, and people said he overstretched there. And then he came out with this indictment of Gaddafi that included the Viagra rape story and all of these things. I mean, he's just completely out of line. And some people have suggested he's even projecting onto Gaddafi what he's guilty of himself, because he's been accused of sexual harassment of his own staff and things like that. Nothing that was proven in a court of law, but again, there's been those accusations. So interesting to hear about the people that are going after these types of positions of power, like the International Criminal Court. But again, it shows that we are being engineered into this system of this new international judicial order, whereby the international community, i.e. whoever's in control of the strongest military, will get to use that court as a tool to justify their military intervention.
Well, I think the whole pretext to go into Libya was a farce to begin with. Wasn't it proven wrong that the impetus, the airstrikes on civilians, was utterly false, and that these people these people aren't protesters but armed rebels? I find it interesting that what do you suppose would happen in any of the Western countries if there was an armed rebellion against the government?
I'm assuming that it would probably not be portrayed as a spontaneous, wonderful uprising of democracy-loving people, but of course it would be those dastardly terrorists. And of course we've already seen the preconditioning for that type of thing with ridiculous things in the United States, like the MIAC report, the Missouri Information Analysis Center, and other types of reports like that have tried to label basically any type of opposition to government, or even any criticism of government, as terrorism. And that's the war on terror paradigm that we've been led into. But of course, when it happens in another country that has strategic interests for Western powers, well, obviously then it's definitely a spontaneous, loving uprising of democracy-loving people, regardless of the reports that are coming out now from Libya about how these so-called rebels, who consist mainly of Arabs, are committing atrocities against the black population of Libya. But let's not look into that too much. Let's only concentrate on stories about Viagra rapes and of the Gaddafi forces and things like that.
Well, I'd like to talk about the civilian, how this has affected the civilian population, because there's been a number of independent journalists who've gone to Tripoli and all over Libya and said they're bombing civilians, and that is not getting any play in the mainstream media.
That's right. And in fact, in some of my recent reports, for example, I've displayed photographs that were taken by a global research associate, Mahdi Nazem Roya. He had photographs of the Libyan university that was bombed by NATO forces, and even though I displayed those in my report, there were people who were commenting on the YouTube video and things that this is clearly fake, and why are you showing these photographs and things like that. So people don't. It's not only that these things aren't being reported, but when they are reported, people won't even believe them, won't even look at them, won't even consider them, because they're not being told to them by people with 1,000-watt smiles in $2,000 suits in $1 million TV studio. So again, the media control is absolute critical linchpin of the entire system. But you're right, there are independent analysts and journalists and humanitarian crusaders and other people who are in Libya right now trying to report on what's really happening there. And I had a recent interview with Mahdi Nazem Roya where he was talking about the ways that journalists were literally making up stories, sitting there in the hotel, not leaving the hotel, but making up stories about trips that they didn't take to other parts of Libya to meet with rebels and things like that. So demonstrably false reporting that's going on, and all sorts of things that again, how would you or I or most average people without access to actually being there, how would we know about that type of thing? These are the types of things that go on in war, I'm sure, all the time, and probably have throughout history. But luckily we are in an age empowered by internet driven alternative media, where we can disseminate stories that go against what's being reported by the corporate establishment, and that is definitely anathema to the interests of the Western interventionists who want to use the media as their propaganda arm, which is why conversations like this are so important, I think, in trying to disseminate information that most people would never have heard in any other forum.
All right, well, thank you for joining me. It's been very informative. I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.